Some discoveries don't arrive with noise or chaos. They arrive quietly and wrong. Wrong in a way that unsettles you before you can explain why. Wrong in a way that forces you to stop, reread, and question your own understanding. That is the position Prince Harry is now believed to be in. Not because of scandal, not because of accusations shouted by critics, but because of a detail that should never have existed at all. A number. A number tied to a time before cameras, before royal protocols, before reputations required protection. A number from a forgotten corner of the past that, once noticed, refuses to fit into the story that followed. And when that number surfaces, the narrative Harry defended for years begins to lose its internal logic. For a long time, Harry's certainty never wavered. Meghan's account was the truth. Every contradiction was dismissed as hostility. Every challenge was labeled cruelty. One voice in particular was written off completely, a voice the public was encouraged not to take seriously. Samantha Markle. She was framed as irrelevant, resentful, and motivated by bitterness. Her words were not examined, they were discarded. But narratives become fragile when the person being ignored isn't speculating, when they are pointing to dates, ages, and documented moments that don't move no matter how often they're dismissed. This is not about rumor, it's not about opinion, it's about chronology. And once timelines stop aligning, belief becomes harder to sustain. Years before royal life, before wedding headlines, before carefully managed public images, someone close to Meghan noticed inconsistencies. Not dramatic ones, not shocking revelations, just subtle shifts, details that quietly changed over time. A year adjusted here, an age altered there. Individually harmless, collectively unsettling. Samantha Markle wasn't reacting to fame. She wasn't rewriting history. She was remembering it. Birthdays, school years, life stages, details that don't blur easily when you've lived alongside them. When Meghan's public biography began circulating, Samantha didn't see inspiration or reinvention. She saw discrepancies between what was being presented and what she remembered growing up with. When she spoke, the response was swift and unforgiving. Her motives were questioned, her character was attacked, her credibility was never seriously weighed. The narrative was simpler if she could be dismissed entirely. But there was one problem. She never changed her account. She didn't escalate, she didn't add new allegations, she didn't contradict herself. Over years of scrutiny and mockery, her concerns stayed exactly the same. That consistency mattered, not because it proved anything on its own, but because fabrication usually evolves. Memory doesn't. The detail that brought everything back into focus didn't come from a courtroom or leaked files. It didn't emerge from royal archives or investigative journalism. It came from something far more ordinary and therefore harder to dismiss. A magazine. March 1997, a lifestyle publication aimed at teenagers. Easily overlooked, easily forgotten. Inside it, a short feature listing names and ages. No drama, no controversy, just printed information. And there it was, Meghan Markle, listed as 21 years old. Not implied, not estimated. Printed. This wasn't published after fame. It wasn't filtered through publicists or legal teams. It existed in a time when there was no incentive to misrepresent anything, when being older or younger carried no strategic value. That's why it stood out. Because if Meghan were born in 1981, as officially stated later, she would have been 15 or 16 at the time. Yet the magazine listed her as an adult, a discrepancy of several years. Too large to ignore, too specific to be coincidence. The page didn't accuse anyone, it didn't suggest deception, it simply existed. And in doing so, it quietly challenged everything that came after it. On its own, it might have remained an unresolved curiosity, but timelines rarely collapse in isolation. They unravel when multiple inconsistencies begin to echo each other. That echo grew louder years later through words spoken not by critics, but by Prince Harry himself. In his memoir, Spare, Harry described the birth of his son in intimate detail. The atmosphere was calm, the lighting was soft, candles were lit, music played, 2 epidurals were administered, the birth was peaceful. And shortly afterward, Meghan was described as leaving the hospital alert, composed, and ready. Emotionally, the scene felt sincere, but emotionally compelling descriptions don't override biological realities. Anyone familiar with childbirth understands a fundamental truth. After an epidural, mobility does not immediately return. Sensation must gradually come back. Blood pressure must stabilize. Observation is mandatory. Yet Harry's description implied a timeline of roughly 2 hours, from labor to discharge. Not unlikely, not rare, medically impossible. The issue wasn't intent, it wasn't exaggeration, it was the clock. Once time is introduced, the story stops working. And when a story fails physically, it forces a far more uncomfortable question. Not why it was told, but what was adjusted to make it fit. This is where the age question becomes something else entirely. Pregnancy isn't assessed emotionally, it's assessed clinically, and risk increases with age. After 35, pregnancies are labeled advanced maternal age. After 40, they are categorized as high risk. Protocols change, monitoring increases, observation periods lengthen, discharge timelines slow down. If Meghan were the age publicly believed, late 30s, medical oversight would already be extensive. But if she were older, the kind of rapid hospital discharge described would not align with standard medical practice. Add epidurals to that equation, and immediate discharge becomes virtually impossible. Suddenly, other choices begin to look different. The private hospital, the undisclosed medical team, the limited information released publicly. What once appeared as a desire for privacy begins to resemble something else entirely: control. Because privacy protects people, control protects narratives. Once medical facts enter the conversation, storytelling loses flexibility. Numbers don't bend, protocols don't adapt to optics. Understanding why this mattered requires understanding the environments Meghan navigated. In Hollywood, age determines opportunity. Roles narrow, doors close. Adjusting timelines isn't vanity, it's survival. In royalty, age affects optics, fertility assumptions, and expectations around heirs. A younger bride sells romance. An older one invites questions. One story is aspirational, the other is scrutinized. Perfection becomes essential when timelines can't withstand examination. And that perfection required consistency across interviews, biographies, pregnancies, and public appearances. Because once one detail slips, the rest are forced into the light. Every carefully constructed narrative eventually reaches a moment where memory is no longer enough. That moment arrives when documentation enters the frame. That's where Thomas Markle becomes impossible to ignore. Not as a commentator, not as a provocateur, but as a parent who kept records long before anyone imagined they would matter. Thomas Markle wasn't absent from Meghan's early life. He was present. He funded her education. He documented milestones. He kept track of school years, achievements, and timelines the way involved parents do. Not for publicity, but because that's what parents often preserve. His relationship to the past wasn't emotional distance. It was proximity. So when Samantha was publicly portrayed as unreliable, Thomas responded with something simple and damaging to the prevailing narrative. He said she had never lied to him, not once. And more importantly, he said that the concerns she raised aligned with the records he kept. This wasn't retaliation, it wasn't media theater, it was a correction. and corrections are dangerous once a story has already been sold as truth. With Thomas speaking, the issue could no longer be dismissed as sibling rivalry or resentment. It introduced documentation, timelines anchored in lived experience, rather than public relations. The question shifted. It was no longer about who was attacking whom. It became about which version of reality had been promoted, and why. At that point, the story stopped being about Meghan alone. It became about Prince Harry. For years, Harry believed he was defending truth against cruelty, that every challenge was persecution, every doubt was malice. Acting on that belief, he walked away from his family, his country, and his role. But belief is only as strong as the foundation beneath it. If the narrative he protected had already been curated, if timelines were adjusted before he ever encountered them, then his defense wasn't of truth, but of a version of it. That realization doesn't arrive as anger. It arrives as silence. Harry now stands inside a story he helped amplify, confronted with the possibility that some parts were lived and others rehearsed. His interviews, his memoir, his sacrifices, all built on trust. And trust doesn't collapse loudly, it erodes. Samantha Markle isn't celebrating, Thomas Markle isn't campaigning, and the past isn't arguing its case. It's simply there, printed, documented, unchanged. Because the most disruptive truths don't demand belief. They don't seek validation. They don't defend themselves. They wait. And once noticed, they ask only one final question. If something as fundamental as age required revision, what else was quietly adjusted before the world ever thought to look?